I'm a fabulous speaker is a bit of a stretch. But I do want to thank Terry for inviting me to speak tonight. It's not often that I've done this sort of thing, and I'm not someone who, even though, and again, you don't know me, I've been a very public individual at many points in my life, but I am also very private, and I don't like speaking about my life, and have been very hesitant to do that. But I will do that in special circumstances like this, because I do like to share where I've been, and it's tough, certainly, to speak of these things. And I can say this because I'm amongst friends, and I see a lot of very familiar faces in the audience. And that's very heartening because, again, I get very nervous speaking of my life story. But again, I feel like I'm with friends. And so I come from a family of alcoholics. And when I say that, my father was an alcoholic when I was a child growing up, and my mother was as well. And Dad, when he passed, had almost 40 years of sobriety. Mother is still with us, and she's had a little bit more in sobriety than I have. And I'm very thankful for that and for Dad. And my great uncle was one of the first people that was saved by Bill W. in Chicago. And he had nearly 50 years of sobriety when he passed. And so I know alcoholism. I know what it is like. I know it from experiencing it myself, from being a child of an alcoholic. And even knowing that doesn't save you from what happens. You think that somehow because you know what this is and that you've experienced it, that you won't fall into that trap. It's a lie. And it is one of those things where when you find yourself in it, you're like, oh crap, here I am. And I think from my own experience, there is definitely a genetic component to it. And I certainly hope that that will escape other members of our family, but, there's nothing you can really do about that. And so my childhood, growing up in a family of alcoholics, was that alcohol was accepted. It was part of life. It was something that, came with it, including alcoholism and everything that comes with it. And that shapes you as a child. You come to accept it as normal when it is not most certainly normal. And, it was a thing where as kids we were allowed to have beers, which, you think of this now and it's like, what the hell's wrong with you? And that was just part and parcel of it. My grandfather was, when I had teething pains, we'll give him some whiskey, that'll shut him up. And, there you go. And there were many points in my life where even after Dad went into sobriety, and I was part of Al-Anon, as I'm sure many of us probably were, and, I'm learning about alcoholism as a disease. And there's this naivete that you have. Well, I'm aware of this. Clearly, I'm going to avoid this. And yet I'm hanging out with friends and, we're stealing alcohol from our parents and we're drinking. Okay, what a surprise. And, that was just kind of part and parcel of it. I was part of the generation, too, and I'll tell you my age. I'm going to be 59 next month. And there was the change where the drinking laws went from 18 to 21. And I was part of that grandfather where you were 18 and you could still buy alcohol. And I was a senior in high school, so I was suddenly very popular with everybody in high school because I could go and get alcohol for the parties. And that's what I did, because that was what made you popular. That's what made you very beloved in the high school community. And so I was one of the cool kids that would do that. And that's where the problem drinking started to begin as well. And again, you would think you would be aware of this, but, you fall into this sort of thing. Part of it, too, and this is kind of the uniqueness of being gay and coming out in the very late 70s, the very early 80s, where we were very closeted. We couldn't be open about who we were. And we wanted to ingratiate ourselves with others. And that's what you did. And so, got through high school, starting to have sexual experiences with people in high school, going off to university where I'm freed of my parents and I can be who I want to be. Well, that's where the party really starts, folks, because it's the 80s, and you can start drinking, and you can go out to the clubs. And I went to Tampa, and there were a lot of gay clubs there. But it was still a very closeted experience back then. And the era was very exciting, where you're starting to experiment and trying out drugs as well. Because in a lot of cases, alcohol is a gateway to other drugs as well. And I don't want to sound all doom and gloom there, but yeah, there it goes. You start drinking, you start drugging, you're going out and you're clubbing. And I was in a fraternity, and our fraternity was probably partly gay because I was the rush chairman. I was picking guys that were hot. I'm not going to lie. And we started having what we would jokingly call brothers' night at the gay club in town, because they had quarter drink night on Tuesdays, and who doesn't like quarter drinks and hanging out with hot guys? And it just keeps going from there. And this is as the AIDS crisis is starting as well. And when I graduated university, and I did it by the skin of my teeth, I stayed in town. And this is one of those things where, again, you're just drinking, you're drugging. I'm a party boy. I was good looking and young then. I'm not anymore. But that's the thing. You just fall into this. And there were a lot of nights where I was driving home, blackout drunk from the clubs. And there were a lot of times I was hooking up with people, and I was blackout drunk or just completely blitzed out of my mind on all sorts of drugs. And you keep going from there. And it turned into this very hand-to-mouth existence after university, where, I'm barely making the bills, I'm barely keeping the lights on and the phone on and everything else. And it just keeps going for years and years. And I finally find a boyfriend, and I'm with him for a while. And it ends, and another one, and another one. And this is one of those things where I'm drinking, I'm drugging, and there's a God-sized hole in my life. And I carry on my keyring, and maybe some of you do too. There's a washer on there. And nobody really kind of knows what that is. But that was a God-sized hole in my life. And I was filling it up with drugs and sex and alcohol because my life was empty. It was very meaningless. I didn't have a good relationship with my parents at that point. There was a lot of resentment that had built up from the years that came before. And we'll get to where that comes to get cleared out later on. And that was just one of those things where I was bound up in ego. I was bound up in self. And I didn't care about other people. It was all about me and what I wanted to do. And this carried on actually for a really long time. It came to a point where in the early 90s, I started to lose friends as a result of AIDS, and I started doing more volunteer work. And you would think that would shift me out of myself, and it really didn't. Because I wanted to do this for self-aggrandizement. I wanted to get recognition for it. And I was very much a public person in Tampa at that point. I had a radio show that I did. And it wasn't about anything but myself. And I did a lot of volunteer work and charity work, and I got a lot of recognition for it. And I'll be honest, I wasn't doing it out of the kindness of my heart. I was doing it because I wanted that publicity. I wanted that recognition. And yes, I was doing good for the community, but a lot of it was all about me. So I started to lose friends, and there was a point where finally I kind of had an awakening about my addiction to drugs, and I stopped. And I got into a relationship with my husband, Michael, who I've been with, I might add now, for 27 years. And then there's that problem with alcohol, because it's still hiding in the background, and it's acceptable, whereas drugs aren't. And so it keeps going. And it took me a while to come really to the bottom. And people will talk about, coming to a bottom and really rock hard. And there should have been several warning signs along the way where I've wrecked cars, I've had DUIs, I've had all sorts of things happen. And it finally takes me losing a job and getting called out on my bullshit for drinking by Michael. And, it was the whole, this has got to stop. And just the hard line being read. And it was one of those things where he said, you need to really look at yourself and the things that have been going on, not just recently, but throughout your life. Because nobody has ever called you to account on your shit. This is your day of reckoning. You need to think about this and all that you've done and what you're doing to yourself. Never mind what you're doing to me. Never mind what you're doing to your family. You need to think about what you're doing to yourself because the problem lies with you. And he said, I don't want you to get sober for me. I don't want you to get sober for your family. I need you to get sober for yourself. But you have to want this. And that was really tough because nobody had ever said that to me before. It was always you need to do this for this person or do this for that person. And I didn't give a crap about other people, let's be honest. And that was tough because I was being forced to confront me for who I am. And that was the point where I'd lost my job. And, Michael was very honest with me. He's like, I'm not going to support you through this. You're going to have to go. You're going to have to get a new job. You're going to have to prove yourself. You're going to have to earn this. And that was tough. And I had to really humble myself and go out and get a job. And it was not a good job, I might add. And I had a very good job as a manager at that point with a manufacturer. It was a good job, and I blew it royally. And I had had a crisis of confidence some years before. The company I worked with went bankrupt. It was terrible. Some of you may remember WorldCom and the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history up to that point. Well, that was me. I worked for WorldCom, and my resume was toxic. And I'd been rebuilding it up to that point. And I was drunk at work that day, and I shot my mouth off, and that was the end of it. And I had to start all over again, and it was with a company that I had worked for before. It was not the level that I was at before. It was starting from the very bottom and starting my way up. And so at the same time that I was going into bright, overlit rooms for AA and working the program, and I was going into bright, overlit rooms very early in the morning before the sun was coming up to start my career and my life all over again. And that was the thing. I had to be very fundamentally honest with myself, who I was, where I was. And it was not pretty. Showing up at that first meeting and having to realize and state for a fact, I was no different, no better than my father was. I was no better and no different than anybody else in that room. I had a serious problem, and I had to accept it. And that was really tough because all those years I had thought to myself I was somehow better or somehow different. And the reality is no. None of us who come into that room are any better or any different than anybody else. We all have the same problem. And it was time to start tearing down all those things that I thought about myself, all those things that I believed about myself, and starting over again. And I'll be honest, the first 3 steps were pretty easy to work through. The one step that scared me the most, and I'm sure this is probably true for everybody, was the 4th step. When you get there, and you have to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, because that's really where the rubber hits the road. And we have to look at who we are and the stuff that we do. And there's a lot of things in our own lives that are very hard for us to confront and to deal with. And that, for me, and again, I hope this is true for everybody else, maybe it's just me, there's a lot of stuff that I never had nobody ever called me on this shit. And there were a lot of things that still to this day, when I worked the steps every year, and again, it was kind of one of these odd coincidences where I started in January, coming into the program. And every month I work a step. January is the first step. February is the second step. And we keep going through. And my God, every April it is always tough because I'm still going through that searching and then the inventory. And there's things that you forget about and things that you work through again. And it's like, God, I forgot about this. There's tendencies that we fall back on, even after we've had several years of sobriety. We fall into old patterns and old behavior. And that's the tough thing. There's especially things like hoarding, for example. Just kind of a typical thing. You know, we moved from Atlanta to Dallas, and there were a lot of things that we had. We had a huge townhouse that was just crammed full of things. And it was kind of the running joke where I kept taking things in for donation to the thrift store and getting rid of stuff and selling stuff. And here I am all these years later. There's still more stuff I'm getting rid of. And a lot of this is just stuff that you get bound up in. And it's steps that you have to keep working over and over again. I remember when I got to step 9 that first year, and that was really a tough one where you're making amends to people. And the toughest thing was going into that was I was fearful of what people were going to say to me when I apologized for the terrible things that I've done over the years. And I think of my parents, which is where I started. And that was really tough because there were so many things that I felt I had to atone for and things that I had done terribly wrong. We had not had the best relationship for many years. And it was funny because when I talked to them, they were already very forgiving. And they said, we've forgiven you for that. And with Dad, having been in the program for so many years, you know, he was the first to say, you know, Toddy, I had to forgive you these things. I couldn't hold on to them. I couldn't wait for you to ask for forgiveness. And Mom was pretty much the same way. And Michael, my husband, so many of my other friends that I had to make amends for were the same way. And it was a relief because I was afraid they still had that anger and resentment and hostility over things that I had said and things that I had done. And in a lot of respects, I had made it worse on myself. And I think so often we do that. We hold this animosity against ourselves for things that we've done and failing to seek that reconciliation, to seek that forgiveness. And in a lot of cases, folks have moved beyond that. They couldn't hold on to that. They knew that it was the disease of alcoholism. They knew that it was the fact that, you know, as somebody said to me, you just weren't right. You weren't yourself. And thank God for that. Because, you know, I had made it harder on myself. And that's the cage that we put ourselves into as alcoholics. We beat ourselves up. And people have forgiven us. Now, some people certainly haven't. I don't mean to make this sound like everything was all, you know, sunshine and roses. There were people who were very angry and very bitter about that. But what I also learned in that, too, is that I had to be more forgiving to others, and I hadn't been. I had been very strict and very stern and very unforgiving. And if people could be forgiving to me, I had to be forgiving to them. And that was really so critical. And I learned in the process that I had to start being forgiving to people. And even if people weren't asking for forgiveness, I had to give them forgiveness. And that for me was a real enlightening moment. And there were a lot of cases where I had to tell people, this is how it made me feel when this happened. And let them know I don't hold any anger or any, animosity or animus for you for this. And a lot of people were very thankful for that. And they didn't realize that they had come across that way. And that was the beauty of that, was learning forgiveness. And I think too often in the world that we live in right now, there is a lot of anger that we hold to people who are very different than us. And we need more forgiveness, and we need more of that. Then the following up on that, the 10th step, with admitting that we were wrong, going through that and learning that having to forgive people for things that had happened in the past, but also realizing that we're not perfect. We are, trying to be better people and learning to forgive and to express contrition when we say and do things. And that was tough for me. And I've learned now the importance of saying that when it occurs and trying to be more sensitive to the fact that, I'm still going to screw up. I'm going to say things that are intemperate. I'm going to say things that are messed up, frankly, and kind of really reflective of, like I'm still drinking or something. And being quicker to say when I'm wrong with that. That has been something that also has been kind of tricky for me. But again, if you're working the program with rigorous honesty, you're going to learn to do that. And that's an ongoing function of what you have to do. And this feels crazy for me, talking to people in a room that have got 40 years of sobriety and other people. But for me, this is, kind of my life's journey where this is something that I feel, even though I've been in this now for 8 years, I still feel very much new in this. And I don't know, honestly, if there ever comes a point where it ceases to be new or that you're still working this. You do the best that you can, really. The thing also, too, that struck me as I've been working the program is the vision for you. And I think a lot of times people felt like I had a vision of what I was going to do in life, or I had this game plan or grand strategy of what I was looking to do in life. And the reality is that no, I just kind of stumbled through life. And I think a lot of us probably do stumble through life. And in a lot of cases in the 80s, when I was struggling through drinking and drugging and friends dying, there was no game plan. I didn't even really think that I would live to be 30, let alone 40, or where I am right now at 58. I didn't think that was going to happen. When I got sober, it was this whole reality of, good Lord, now I have to really kind of figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And I thank God for the program, because now I actually can put my life together. I can actually start to rebuild and move beyond it. And one of the things that has always struck me when I was going through the early days of sobriety is that you're never a prisoner of your past. It was a lesson. It's not a life sentence. And that you have to let go of these things, that you have beaten yourself up in the past. And Lord knows there were a lot of things that I did in the past that were terrible. They were beyond the pale. And that's the key thing, is that I've had to learn it was a lesson. It doesn't define who you are. It's, not everything. It's not a life sentence. And so what life is like now, having gone through the program and working it for so many years now, the good news is that I've started to repair these relationships that were very frayed, that were in very bad shape with my family. My father, I think, more than anyone, was so thrilled when I finally admitted that I was an alcoholic and started going to meetings. And we had this really beautiful relationship that started at that point, where we could talk so very openly and very honestly and freely about all the things that had happened over all the years. And that was the beauty, was it was like being in these rooms where you can be very honest about everything. And he could say what he had gone through in life, and I could say what I had gone through in life. And there were instances where I was very angry about things that had happened when I was a child, but he was doing it to protect me. An example that I'll throw out there was I had always wanted to be a Boy Scout, and this sounds like incredibly trivial stuff. But he wouldn't let me, and I was so angry about this. And the reason he didn't was there was a pedophile at our church that was molesting Boy Scouts. It was the 60s. He was aware of it. They couldn't really call the cops. They couldn't do anything about it. And this has all come out in the air in recent years about the molestation and different things that were going on. And he was very honest about that. This is why I wouldn't let you become. I didn't want you to wind up like that. There were altar boys at church that were also being molested by priests. I had no idea. And there's that expression about God looks out for drunks and little children. Well, yeah, he was looking out for my dad, who was a drunk, and he was looking out for me, a child. And we can't question sometimes some of the things that our parents do. But the nice thing is that we've got this ability to talk about it, and we did, Dad and I. And so that we could reconcile and we could heal those places in our hearts that were broken. And Mom and I have this wonderful relationship now as well. She's, there were many things that I had to forgive her for that I was not aware of. Things that really caused considerable pain. Some things that I got blamed for. And she fell into some of the same traps that I did. She was looking for love. She was looking for validation. And in the process, she did something that was incredibly destructive to our family business, to my father, to us as children. We didn't know of it. And we wound up having to move. And she used me as a convenient excuse as to why we had to move when we had to move. And I can't look back and blame her for the things that she did or how things might have been. Things happened. You have to let it go. And I have a much better relationship with my two sisters now. My one sister and I had a very antagonistic relationship. And a lot of it was I was drinking. And she knew how to push my buttons, just like my mother-in-law. And the thing is, now that I've stopped drinking and I'm working the program, I've taken that button away. They can't push the button anymore. The button does not respond. Because I'm not enabling them. I'm not allowing them to work me, to work my nerves. And I've seen people now for who they are. Some of them are much better people than I thought they were. Some people are, for better or for worse, who they are. And I have to accept that. But I have to acknowledge that. There's no control that I have. And that's, thinking of our meeting this morning at 10 o'clock, that was our topic, was tolerance. And as I said at that meeting, it is about control. There are things that I can control, and there are things I cannot control. I can't control their behavior and what they're going to do. I can control how I'm going to react. And that's really the key of that. And it's an opportunity to really kind of hit the reset button with my family. And I'm so thankful for that. When I think of Dad passing, he passed 5 years ago. And were I drinking, I could not have been there. I just would not have been able to really cope with that. He had terminal cancer. The end was not pretty. And I was able to be there as much for him as for my sisters and my mom. And I couldn't have done that if I were still drinking. And it was important to me to be there to hold his hand as he transitioned, but also to be there for Mom and Dad. And Mom was not able to talk to all of the friends and relatives that had to be talked to and to communicate this on. And that was something where I was able to step up and talk to these folks. And it was a blessing because I had a lot of laughs talking to these people. And we shared funny stories about Dad and his drinking days and what he was like, but also how Dad was a sweet father, like the father I had never known, and the grandfather to my nieces and nephews. And he was such a different person, and I was so glad for that. And that's what I wanted to have in sobriety, is to be that different person, to be there for these people, to be connected, to be grounded. And that's what I'm so thankful for the program for, is that now I do have that ability to be there and to be a better person for them. And I've rebuilt my career, and I did hit a serious bottom. And it was one of those where I've been able to recover my career and build a career to a point now where I am amazed, where I am respected doing what I do as a paralegal. It was something that kind of started into on a lark, and built my career on that with the support of my husband Michael. And it was something where I probably didn't have the confidence that I should have had. And that's the thing where with the program, you're working it, you rebuild confidence in yourself. You learn how to interact with people. You learn how not to react to things that happen to you. You break out of those old ways of thinking. And I'm so thankful for that, because I couldn't do what I do today were I still drinking. And I'm seeing things for how they are, not how I wish them to be. And that's one of the key things. When I was drinking, it was I wish it was this. I wish it was that. I hate that it's like this. And it's not accepting those things you can control and things you can't control. And I talk very often when I'm in meetings about this thing, because you have to let go of those things you can't control. And that's true whether it's my job, that's true whether it's my marriage, or viewing my future. And I'm never going to say my marriage is perfect. Those who know me very well know it has had its ups and downs. And you have to take it one day at a time, which, again, another one of the things that we throw out in these meetings. And it takes work, much like work in the program. And there are things that I wish Michael would share with me. I wish there were things I could share with Michael. And it's just the way that it is. But the reality is I've seen this film before, and I know what happens if I pick up a drink. And if I think that I'm in control, and if I think that I am somehow better or somehow different. And I've had relapses, I'm not going to lie. And they have ended badly. And that's because I forgot how the film ended. And it is never pretty. You can pick up that drink, but it's not going to fix the problems. What's going to fix the problems is communication, work in the program, being honest, brutal honesty. We talk in here about spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. And that's the key thing. You have to keep working at it. We will never be the perfect people that we want to be. And you know what? Thank God. I wouldn't want to be perfect. I tried to be perfect when I was drinking. And you know what? I was a hot mess. And I would rather be trying and failing than thinking that I am perfection and all that, and I'm nowhere even near it. And in the bottom line, life is what you make it. You have to be very honest about yourself. You have to accept the limitations that are in front of you, and know that you can't have everything that you want. I don't know really quite what else to say on that. I wish that I were sober. But you know what? I think of the joke that somebody said one time is, all you have to be is sober for today, forever. And that's the reality of it. You're not going to be perfect. All you have to do is be sober today, forever. And like I said, I've seen that film before. I know what happens if you aren't sober today, forever. And I thank God for my sobriety today, and I hope to have many tomorrows where I'm staying sober forever. And that's pretty much it. Thank you so much.